Welcome to the main line. My name is Adam Jaquez. Normally, my co-host Tyler Burton would join me as well. He gets another week off to work on the new mainline studio in Colorado. So if you're missing him, let us know in the comments at YouTube or hit us up on Twitter at the Mainline Pod. Got some things we're going to talk about today, though, in the world of OU. We've got a nice would you rather when it comes to football in terms of would you rather have two 1,000-yard rushers or two 1,000-yard receivers this upcoming season? What might be more realistic and what might be more useful for the Sooners on the field? And then, of course, we'll talk some Women's World Series and potentially the draw that Oklahoma got there that might be incredibly favorable for Patty Gasso and the girls. And then, of course, we'll round things out with baseball in the first regional returning to Norman since 2010. So a special moment for the baseball program. But we got to get things started off with football here. And a would you rather question. You know, we just mentioned it, 1,000 yards, two rushers, or 1,000 yards, two receivers. And there's a couple different candidates that we could be looking at to accomplish this particular feat. Hasn't been done in a whole lot since 2020. If we just go back throughout the years, Jalen Hurts and Kennedy Brooks did it in 2019, over 1,000 yards on the ground each. Kyler Murray and Kennedy Brooks again the year before in 2018. And then that same year, we saw two 1,000-yard duos receiving in 2018 from Marquise Brown and CeeDee Lamb. Go back a year before that, finished just 42 yards shy of a duo receiving between Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown. And then go back to 2016, Thunder and Lightning, Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon accomplishing the feat. Then going back another 8 years before that, Chris Brown, DeMarco Murray, both on the ground. So it hasn't happened a ton in terms of OU history. It is very difficult. And the question isn't necessarily will it happen or what is the probability of it happening, but what would be the most useful and which would you rather have here? And as we're going through on YouTube here, a lot of people are seeing the highlights from Jaleel Farouk, from Nick Anderson, from Deion Burks there in the spring game, even Brennan Thompson as well. And so there's a lot of guys. I probably missed somebody in that rotation as well, but there's a lot of guys that could contribute and significantly put up a ton of yards through the air from Jackson Arnold. And if we're able to get two 1,000-yard receivers, I think that means some really good things have happened for this Oklahoma football team. One, Jackson Arnold is elite. He's exactly who we thought he was when we got him out of Denton Guyer. And two, Emmett Jones, killing it. We all know he's great, but he's probably headed off for a head coaching job at the end of the season if there's 2,000-yard receivers coming out of Oklahoma. And you might go, oh, no, I don't know if I want that. But if he's so good that he's getting a head coaching job, that's great. I think you definitely want more guys in your coaching tree there. So that would be fantastic. We probably also are finding a first-round NFL draft pick, whether it be Nick Anderson with his elite size and speed combination, or Deion Burks with maybe his elite speed, or maybe Andrew Anthony comes back and he hasn't missed a beat from the injury potentially. That could be another option there as far as someone that could go in the first round. I guess the downside of that is maybe you're playing from behind a lot. Kind of, you know, we know this is our win total is around 7 is what Vegas thinks Oklahoma's going to be at. So it's quite possible that we could be seeing some more games where we're coming from behind and maybe we are going to have to pass the ball quite a bit more. On the flip side, from a rushing perspective, not as much of the obvious candidates there that we could be looking at. Gavin Sawchuk, obviously, he had 744 yards a year ago, but then behind him, it's almost total mystery. Is it going to be Caleb Hicks that steps in and takes on that number 2 running back position? Does Javonte Barnes get out of the funk that was the 2023 season? And does he look a lot more like what he did before? And for those watching on YouTube, you're seeing the Taylor Tatum highlights right now. Does he come in here in a couple of weeks? I believe they're coming in June, the freshmen are. And does he really light up, the second half of the year? Does Gavin Sawchuk get us started and get, 500 yards through the first 4 games? And then Taylor Tatum kind of takes over and becomes, the best running back in the nation that we all thought he might be coming out of high school there in Longview, Texas. We'll see. That's some options. There's also the possibility that maybe it's Jackson Arnold who becomes that second 1,000-yard rusher next to Gavin Sawchuk. That's a possibility as well. At Denton Guyer in his senior year, he had about 850 yards in his final season in high school. I don't think Oklahoma is going to choose to run him necessarily as much as probably they did with Dylan Gabriel last year. It's not necessarily his strong suit. Doesn't mean he can't do it. But certainly maybe an area where they're going to say, hey, your better attribute is your arm. So we're not going to ask you to run too much. So could he get to 1,000 yards from a few design calls and then maybe some scrambling on top of that? Possibly. I think I'd lean a little bit more heavily to the second option of maybe a Taylor Tatum, a Caleb Hicks, Javonte Barnes, or someone else potentially just steps up and says, hey, I'm going to be the the 1A to the 1B of Gavin Sawchuk potentially there. So some really good positives that are happening there is one, if you're running the ball so effectively, you're keeping your defense off the field, and you probably are putting up some really elite defensive statistics for Brent Venables' third year in Norman, just because they're going to face fewer plays. If you're able to run the ball effectively, you're burning clock, you're probably ahead there. It also means that the offensive line really developed and probably better than any of us could have expected there. So some really good positives. I think also Seth Luttrell and his new offense, I think that will probably say a lot about, hey, his schemes and his running schemes were a better fit for our running back, for Bill Bedenbaugh and how he wants to coach those offensive linemen as well. And it's maybe a little bit more simplified and less reliant as far as what Jeff Lebby's offense was in terms of, okay, we're just going to hurry up and hike the ball. And we're working more around the element of surprise than actually like scheming effectively versus each defense there. So two possibilities. Which one do you think, would be the better fit there, or be the more beneficial to this Oklahoma team in 2024? Is it two 1,000-yard receivers, which I guess could count as a tight end as well? I don't know if Bauer Sharp's going to be able to handle that type of load. Would have liked to have seen a lot more of him in the spring game. I know he got a little bit dinged up there, but that's also a possibility. Or is it the two 1,000-yard rushers? Which would be more beneficial? I'd love to hear your feedback. If you're watching on YouTube, let us drop a comment. Let us know what would be your preference and who you think is going to make that particular option. Or if you're listening on the podcast later, hit us up on Twitter. I'm sure we'll have a tweet up by the time you guys are listening to the show there. So something interesting to think about. Always got to keep it fresh when we talk about football. But let's talk a little bit about softball. The Lady Sooners are headed up to Oklahoma City, our favorite place to be every June. And we, the Seminoles gave up, a decent performance there in Norman in the Super Regionals. But I think overall, there wasn't a whole lot of doubt throughout this one that Oklahoma was going to be able to take down Florida State and head up the road to Oklahoma City. And we saw some really good things. I think for me, probably the most important one was Nicole May coming in the final two innings in that game on Friday evening, pitching 2 clean innings, no hits, no walks. Didn't have any strikeouts either, but 18 pitches to get 6 outs. That's great. That's exactly what we needed out of Nicole May. And so it does feel like, all right, maybe we are seeing her peak at the right time, because Kelly Maxwell, Friday, or I guess game 1 would have been Thursday night against Florida State. She had a performance by her standards. She would probably tell you, not up to par for what she's capable of. For most other pitchers around the country, still pretty solid, but there are moments where it's like, okay, if Kelly Maxwell doesn't have it, who are we going to go to if we're facing an elimination game? And you love to see that, okay, Nicole May has now had 2 really great outings, both in regionals and super regionals. So things could be trending in the right direction for where Oklahoma needs that bullpen to be heading to Oklahoma City, where, yes, on one side of the bracket, on Oklahoma's side of the bracket, I think you got the better draw. You've got Alabama up above you and UCLA up above you, and then Oklahoma facing off against a Duke team that is really good. But overall, you are going to have to face some of those teams from the other side of the bracket, whether that's they flip into your bracket after a loss, or you flip into their bracket after a loss, or maybe you meet up with one of those teams in the final series. You're playing some elite hitting teams in Texas, in Oklahoma State, in Florida. Stanford, not known as much for their hitting, but if they're able to make it there, you're going to want some lockdown pitchers as well, because they've got Najari Kennedy. So that maybe 1-2 runs maybe is all you need to win that game. So can you hold down a Stanford lineup there? So there's some things that are really interesting, and I think trending in the right direction for the Oklahoma program here and the team, this year's team, as they head into Oklahoma City. Now, first you gotta beat Duke on Thursday afternoon on ESPN, and Duke played Oklahoma. They lost in the opener in Mexico way back at the very beginning of the season, 3-0. And since then, the Blue Devils have gone 52-6. So a very impressive resume for them. I think that they should have been a top 8 seed. The NCAA didn't agree with that. I think they got snubbed a little bit, so they did have to go on the road to play Missouri this past weekend in Super Regionals, and they were able to pull it out there. And really what's powering this Duke team is that they've got 2 top 10 ERA pitchers in Jayla Wright and Cassidy Curd, both 1.35 or under on the year. And Oklahoma faced both of them in the opener in Mexico. So they've seen it, but it's been a long time. They've developed, our batters have developed. So I think it's going to be fresh. I think it's going to be new for everybody involved there. And so a very tough matchup there for Oklahoma to have in their very first game. Now, for those watching on YouTube, we'll take a look at the bracket here for a second. Take a look at what this path could look like for Oklahoma. So you win against Duke, you're playing UCLA or Alabama, the winner of that game on Saturday afternoon on ABC. Now, they've spaced out the brackets so well that you're really never going to have a situation where you're going to play 3 games in 3 days until you get to that very final championship series, which is a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week. So you really can, I think if you wanted to, you really could pitch Kelly Maxwell every game if you wanted to. I know Patty's not going to do that. It doesn't really make sense to do that, but you are getting ample rest there. It's a little bit different rhythm than they're used to for most series throughout the year. So we'll see if that comes into play at all. But really, we talked about the draw here, and most of the teams that I think, rightfully so, Oklahoma should be maybe not nervous, but maybe saying, hey, like we'd love to meet Oklahoma State or meet Texas in the championship series and knock them out there rather than having to fight them off in terms of flipping brackets. So Oklahoma, if they take care of business, they probably won't only have to face one of those teams in game 11 potentially. So we'll see what happens there. And that would be the Monday night game after the brackets flip and some losers go around a little bit. But overall, I think you have to feel really positive about where Oklahoma sits in the bracket and what that's going to be able to allow them to do, where you might not have to face Najari Kennedy. You might not have to face Texas at all. Maybe those teams get eliminated, and then Oklahoma can face off against a Florida or an Oklahoma State, or maybe someone from their side of the bracket flips down to the lower half of the bracket, works their way into the championship series, and then they rematch again there. So a lot of potential options there, but I think overall, and for those who have been listening and watching the main line for the last, 2 months or so, I've kind of thought, okay, this Oklahoma team, there's still something it probably doesn't sit super well with me. Whereas like, okay, they're going to dominate like they have in the last couple of years. I still think they're capable of winning a national championship. And we've seen some good things out of them over the last couple of weeks. But then I guess at the same time, you're looking at this bracket and going, okay, well, hey, this probably played out just about as well as we could have asked for it to heading up to Oklahoma City. So I think Oklahoma, both teams, fans, everybody can go forward and say, hey, we got a ton of confidence with where we sit, what we're bringing to the table. We saw some teams get eliminated last week, like Tennessee, for example, that we don't have to worry about at all. And that was one that I feel like Oklahoma didn't get really Tennessee's best shot a season ago when they approached that game in Oklahoma City on that Saturday afternoon in kind of a weird way where they didn't really pitch their best pitchers against Oklahoma, almost as kind of like a weird give up game. It was odd the way that Oklahoma or Tennessee's coaches approached that one. So, but Oklahoma doesn't have to worry about a really good hitting team in the Volunteers. So I think things worked out really well for Oklahoma heading to Oklahoma City. So we'll see what kind of damage they're able to make there in, I guess now it's called Devon Park. So I want to say Hall of Fame Stadium still. So, well, sticking back in Norman for baseball, Oklahoma gets a regional for the first time in over 14 years. And for those who paid attention to what baseball and the selection committee is, it's so convoluted. It's crazy. If you missed it, basically every team that basically squeaked their way in, whether it was Florida State squeaking from, well, I think Florida State probably did deserve to be a top 8 seed, but they were the last top 8 seed there. ECU, the last seed to host a regional. And then bubble teams like Indiana, Coastal Carolina, Kansas State, and Florida as well, all had their athletic directors on the committee that selected teams. Well, guess what? All those teams made in the tournament, made the proper seeding, made their regional host, whatever it might be that they were hoping to just squeeze in, and they all made it in, and Oklahoma sits a spot back at number 9. I think Oklahoma should have been a top 8 seed. I think Florida State should have been a top 8 seed as well, and probably I'd slide Georgia back to that number 9 spot. But this is a committee. It's kind of a, I don't want to say there's like backhand deals going on, but you kind of get that element of, yeah, Florida's athletic director is going to leave the room when they talk about Florida, but no way is ECU's athletic director going to say, hey, we shouldn't have Florida in, because a moment later when they swap and the ECU athletic director leaves the room, he's going to want that Florida athletic director sticking up for him. So I think there's kind of an unspoken element there of like, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, but we're not really going to say it, even though we're outside of the room. It's just awfully convenient how that happens when you get teams like ECU that I think probably Duke had a better case to host. I think Mississippi State had a better case to host. And then some of those bubble teams like Coastal Carolina or James Madison probably had better cases to be outside of the tournament altogether. And some other teams would have gotten in, but it's just how things work out. So we mentioned Duke just a moment ago. That's a very tough program right now that Oklahoma's going to have to face off against. potentially, we'll see. Oklahoma's going to get Oral Roberts Friday night. That's a team that I know a lot of people are familiar with. They went to the World Series a year ago. They went through the regional in Stillwater and blasted everybody up there. And then now they're coming to Norman, but with a losing record. And so the Golden Eagles have an interesting season going on where they're in one of the worst conferences all season in the Summit League. They really just hit the gas at the right time, which was the conference tournament. They went 3-0. Were able to host that tournament at home, so they're able to make the tournament. The team has some talent. I honestly just don't know what you're going to get week to week from them. They beat Oklahoma April 30th, 3-0. About a month before that, Oklahoma run ruled them here in Norman. So there's familiarity with these teams. But at the same time, like Oral Roberts is probably got to be one of the lowest RPI teams that's made the tournament in recent years. And I just don't know what to think about them. Maybe they're hitting their stride at the right time, but I don't know, they've played such weak competition throughout the year and haven't impressed record-wise or anything like that. So talk a little bit about pitching matchups and records or pitching matchups that I would go with, what I think Skip will actually do, because I think there are two different lineups there. But if Oklahoma is able to beat Oral Roberts, then they'll play the winner of Duke or UConn Saturday night at 8 p.m. at L. Mitchell Park. Two programs there. I think clearly Duke is the better program. I would expect Duke to win. I think the Blue Devils should have hosted a regional in Durham. That didn't happen. It's kind of unfortunate that Oklahoma gets the Blue Devils here in Norman, but at the same time, the rest of the lineup between UConn and Oral Roberts, I think this is favorable for Oklahoma. Duke's going to be tough. I think you're really going to have to beat the Blue Devils twice in order to make it 2 super regionals. And I don't think there's any betting lines out as of recording this Tuesday, but probably by the time we get to that game on Friday, I bet Duke will be the favorite to win this regional. And so they're just a talented program. They've got some really good players, both offensively. One might be a familiar name for OU fans in Wallace Clark, who played third base for us just a year ago. He's now shortstop for the Blue Devils. And he's probably their least productive hitter, which is not a knock on anything really there. He's hitting 275, but just shows how effective the rest of the lineup is for the Blue Devils. They went 8-0 this past week in Charlotte to win an ACC tournament. They beat Florida State in doing so. They have over 110 home runs on the year, which is a school record. So they are absolutely just shelling everybody that they're playing, hitting tons of home runs. And then from a pitching perspective, they're a program that their starters may not have a ton of length in what they do, but their bullpen has a lot of depth, especially when you look at their closer who will be coming in. That is a top 3 in the ERA, Charlie Bielenson, I believe is how you pronounce his name. So he's going to come in. He's going to get those last 4 to 6 outs or so. So if Oklahoma is able to match up with the Blue Devils, hopefully in a winner's bracket is where that will happen. That should be a pretty big game Saturday night. That's going to be imperative to get in the lead early and not allow Charlie Bielenson to have an effect on the game late when you need a run or you need to break through or something like that, because that's a lockdown type of closer that the Blue Devils have. So as far as what Oklahoma will probably want to do, I think there's 2 different paths here. This is what I would do as far as a starting pitching lineup. I would do something where I would go, okay, for Oral Roberts Friday night, I liked what we saw at Carter Campbell against Kansas. Or was it Kansas? No, it was Oklahoma State where he started. He was really effective for 3 innings. I liked what he did starting in the Big 12 tournament. So I would go with Carter Campbell on Friday night. And then I would go Braden Davis in the winner's bracket, either against Duke or UConn. I expect that to be Duke. And then I would go Kyson Witherspoon in your closeout game on Sunday, knowing that, hey, if you do have to, if you lose that game and then you have to come back with Grant Stevens for a, if necessary, game to eliminate the Blue Devils or UConn or whoever it is at that point, that's where I would love that lineup, because then you have your starter and Grant Stevens. You have something to kind of a break in case of emergency type of situation there. And the reason I would go with this is because no disrespect to Oral Roberts, but if you're the number 9 seed in all of college baseball and you can't beat the Golden Eagles without Braden Davis, okay, you probably deserve to be in the loser's bracket at that point. So that's kind of where I would go. I think I would give Carter Campbell probably a 3-inning stretch there and then work through your bullpen with some other arms like a Will Carson and just say, hey, like, let's score, 8 to 10 runs and we'll just outscore the Golden Eagles and we won't care too much about who's in, who's pitching. That's ideal scenario. Now, what will Skip Johnson actually do? I think he'll actually go with the normal rotation, which is Braden Davis Friday versus Oral Roberts, Kyson Witherspoon versus Duke or UConn in the hopefully the winner's bracket. And then your closeout game would be Grant Stevens. Now, if that happens and then you have to play a fourth game or even a fifth game in that scenario, where do you go from there? I guess you go Carter Campbell. I guess you go maybe Brendan Girton gets the ball again. He had a little bit of a rough outing this past weekend in Arlington, but maybe he's able to bounce back there. Maybe Carson Atwood. Although I think you really would like to have Carson Atwood come out of your pen probably in that Saturday night game. So a couple different options there, but we'll see what Skip's able to do there. So as far as, what you could do strategy-wise for Braden Davis, I think if you're starting him Friday night against Oral Roberts, I think you get him out of there pretty quickly if you're able to. If Oklahoma is in the lead, 5-0, 6-0, 7-0 by the end of the third inning, which is possible. We have an elite offense. Braden Davis is an elite pitcher. If we're able to get into that type of scenario, I do wonder if we see Skip go to the pen and give Braden Davis a little bit fewer pitches on his arm, knowing that, okay, if you have to play Monday, maybe you can call on Braden Davis to come be a closer in that scenario, similar to how we saw Jake Bennett do in 2022 against the Gators. So as few pitches as we can get on Braden Davis, potentially in a blowout, best case scenario there. We'll see what happens there. But I think it's a very favorable draw for Oklahoma, despite having the Blue Devils there, who is a very dangerous baseball club. So we'll see how that all goes. But excited to see postseason baseball return to Norman. And that's going to be a wrap for our show this week. We will see everyone next week for the next episode of The Main Line.